Welcome to the Still Small Voice Within podcast. I'm Pamela J. Alexander. Each week, I'll begin with a question, explore a few observations from life, share a story, and see what wisdom might emerge along the way. Today's question is, how do we know we're making progress when we can't see the outcome? Here are a few things I've noticed while trying to get from where I am to where I want to be. First, progress often becomes invisible to the person making it. When we're living through change, we tend to focus on what's unfinished. We see the distance remaining more clearly than the distance traveled. A child doesn't notice themselves growing because they see themselves every day. A person recovering from an injury notices the pain that remains more readily than the mobility they've regained. Someone building a business sees the work still ahead rather than the foundations already laid. We quickly become accustomed to our own growth. What once required effort becomes normal. What once felt impossible becomes routine. And because we're present for every incremental step, we often miss the transformation those steps create. But invisible progress is still progress. Second, feelings are not always reliable measures of movement. There are days when growth feels obvious and days when it feels absent. Neither necessarily reflects reality. Evidence, however, often tells a different story than emotions. I've learned that discouragement and stagnation are not the same thing. Sometimes we feel stuck because we're tired. Sometimes we feel discouraged because the destination remains out of sight. Sometimes we mistake uncertainty for lack of progress. Feelings provide valuable information. They point toward what is meaningful or important. Let's not think that emotions have no place in our world and can't be trusted. It's not that they're not important, it's just that they're not always accurate scorekeepers. There are moments when the evidence tells a truer story than our emotions can. The scale may not move. The bank account may not change overnight. The relationship may still feel uncertain, yet meaningful movement may be occurring underneath the surface. The third thing life taught me was markers help us see what familiarity hides. What becomes ordinary for us was once new, difficult, uncertain. Back then, we noticed every detail, every change, every update. Now, we have to purposely look backward to see the progress we no longer notice. Let's think about learning to drive. At first, every mirror, every signal, lane change, and intersection required conscious attention. Eventually, you do all of it without thinking. The skill became invisible precisely because it became integrated. The same thing happens emotionally. Conversations that once terrified us become manageable. Boundaries that once felt impossible become normal. Decisions that once require a day of deliberation become easy. Markers remind us that today's normal was yesterday's challenge. Fourth, process markers are often more useful than outcome markers. We cannot always control results. We can observe actions, habits, choices, boundaries, conversations, and commitments. These become evidence that movement is occurring. Many of the most important changes in life happen long before the outcome appears. The person who eventually runs a marathon began by walking around the block. The successful business began before the first customer arrived. A healthy relationship begins long before the trust is fully established. Outcomes arrive on their own schedule. Process markers, however, are available every day. And they don't have to be complicated. They can be as simple as, did I show up? Did I practice? Did I have the difficult conversation? Did I keep my commitment? Those markers matter because they tell us we're moving regardless of how far remains. The future self is built by the present self. This is so obvious that I almost missed it. Today's small actions becomes tomorrow's reality. Markers are breadcrumbs left behind by a previous version of ourselves. When we look back, we often discover that the person who carried us forward wasn't some future, wiser version of ourselves. It was the version who simply kept going when certainty wasn't available. The version who attended class, made the call, took the walk, practiced the skill, learned something new, started before they felt ready. The future is built quietly, one choice at a time, one marker at a time. I was developing this podcast and I found myself wondering whether I had actually accomplished anything. No podcast episode was recorded. No episode had been released. Nobody was listening. No audience existed. No feedback was arriving. And there was no evidence from the outside world suggesting success. The future remained uncertain. And if I'm honest, uncertainty has a way of disguising progress. I suspect many of us know this feeling. The job search that hasn't produced the offer yet, the recovery that isn't complete, the savings account that isn't where we like it to be, the relationship that hasn't yet become what we'd hope, the project that still feels unfinished. We stand in the middle of the journey, in the strange in-between space between where we were and where we're going, looking toward the horizon and concluding that because we haven't arrived yet, perhaps we haven't moved at all. That's where I found myself. Then I stopped looking at the destination and started looking at the markers. A clear podcast identity, a solid opening, a thoughtful closing, a defined structure, completed episodes even if they hadn't been recorded, additional episodes in development. None of that existed before. The uncertainty remained, but the evidence changed my attitude. And then I realized this wasn't really about the podcast. The same thing had happened in other areas of my life. There are conversations I can have now that I couldn't have 5 years ago. Challenges I can navigate now that once would have overwhelmed me. Questions I can sit with without rushing toward answers. Growth had occurred, even though I wasn't looking and hadn't been counting. That's when the realization emerged. Markers matter. They're breadcrumbs, evidence left behind by a previous version of me saying, you may not feel like you're moving, but look here. This wasn't here before. Now, I can't help but think that progress is not always something we feel. It's something we can learn to recognize. The habit that became consistent, the fear that is acknowledged but no longer makes decisions. The boundary that became normal. The episode that was once only an idea became real. The bridge crossed one plank at a time becomes a memory. And maybe, am I there yet, is still not a good question. Maybe a better question is, what evidence exists that proves that movement is happening? Because if we look carefully, we may discover markers all around us. Small reminders left behind by a former version of ourselves. Proof that even when we feel uncertain, even when we feel stuck, even when we can't see the outcome, we are still moving forward after all. And as always, in closing, I leave you with these questions. What progress have you been overlooking? What evidence of growth have you dismissed? Are you measuring yourself by old standards? And what markers would matter if you were kinder to yourself? Don't worry if you don't have the answers today. Some questions aren't meant to be solved right away. You can simply carry them with you. And when the time is right, they'll be there waiting. If you like this content, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, may you be well.